Nobody was doing what I was doing at the time. So the question had seemingly no answers. And then what happened was when you mix curiosity with the urgency of imminent death, you get power you never knew you had.
Albert Einstein said, "Don't think about why you question, simply don't stop questioning." Welcome to Curated Questions. I am your host, Ken Woodward. And these questions are not mathematical equations, but rather a resource to encounter personal reflection and growth. As Tupac Shakur stated, even a genius asks questions. Now, let's engage the questioning community.
Greetings, Ken Woodward here. Welcome back to another episode of Curated Questions. Together we engage inquisitive humans about how they use questions to navigate and make sense of our world. I am a fellow traveler and pilgrim on this journey, and I'm glad you are here. Today's conversation is with Lisa Wimberger. Now, to understand Lisa's story, we must first recognize that humans have three options in moments of stress or fear: fight, flee, and freeze. Lisa is predisposed to the freeze response. Hit by lightning on her 15th birthday, clinically flatlined on multiple occasions, non-epileptic seizures became routine and recovery debilitating. With no known treatments, doctors encouraged hydration and stress management. Determined to find healing, Lisa fused brain science and a lifelong mindfulness practice to develop the Neurosculpting modality that engages both sides of the brain to provide practitioners a platform for efficacy and healing. Heavy on science and results, Lisa has taught corporate leaders, law enforcement, and first responders nationwide the tools of emotional regulation. She uses her traumatic experience as a vehicle for healing and transformation. Lisa holds a master's degree in education, a foundation certificate in neuro leadership, and certificates in medical neuroscience, visual perception, brain, and neurobiology. She is an author, coach, sought-after speaker, and entrepreneur who runs multiple companies. I first discovered Lisa's work through her Neurosculpting Instagram post, where she provides brain challenges to over 300,000 followers. While simple concepts, execution proves challenging. But that is precisely the point. Challenge your brain for resilience and grow new pathways. Lisa, welcome to Curated Questions.
It's great to be here. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Very excited when you said yes in anticipation of understanding how questions in the brain are working together. So I think you'll be able to bring a bunch of insight. So I'd like to start with when did you first understand the power of questions?
That's a great question to ask about questions. I think it first dawned on me just before I was 16. My friend and I, we were taking German in school, and it was our language elective, and we wanted to go to Germany. And there was no way our parents were going to let us go to Germany. And we sat there asking, what would it be like if we could go? And I feel like that was the first moment where I got a sense that I could carve a destiny intentionally. And it started with that question. We did end up going to Germany somehow. Two almost 16-year-olds convinced our parents separately that the other one was allowed to go, even though we hadn't had permission. And somehow that got our parents on board. Long story short, we became exchange students and we went to Germany. I turned 16 in Germany. And it really got there because we both were willing to say, I wonder what it might look like if we could be there. That was the first moment of the profound capacity of inquiry.
Wow. What's something that you learned in Germany that surprised you?
Everything. I mean, honestly, going to a foreign country as a teenager without parents or family is probably the full visceral embodied art of questioning, right? Because questions mean you don't know the answers. And when you're in a new culture, in a new language, in a new environment alone, you have no roadmap. So it was a full throttle experience of novelty. And I would say that I learned more in that trip probably than I recall at any other time in my life in such a concentrated dose. Everything from how I show up as a human to learning a new language to how to interact with people of another culture to how to be sort of autonomous in a space that was totally foreign to me. It was profound.
That is lovely. Tim Ferriss talks about his love of going to Japan and walking around because it's exceedingly safe, but it's just everything is so different. So
Yes.
it's a great assault on the senses, in a beautiful way because sight,
Absolutely.
sound, smells, everything is just hitting you.
Yeah,
So,
everything is a question mark because you have no answers and it unfolds in real time for you. It puts you into presence, puts you into questioning, puts you into novelty, awe. And as we can get into later, all of those are game-changing neuroplastic aspects of the brain. So it's very neuroprotective, actually, to do that.
You said that was at 16. I read in the intro, hit by lightning at 15.
Yes.
So here you are within 1 year's time after having that experience to having the full-on assault experience of being in another country, 16 years old. I'm curious, how did that work for you?
Everything about my life is just absolutely bizarre when I play it back.
Okay.
Yes, but I was hit when I was 15. It was my birthday, and there was about 8 kids. We were playing outside. My parents weren't there. I was at a friend's house. We were like vacationing at a friend's house far away. And storm came in, and we all took shelter under a house that was nearby, an awning. And I was leaning against the metal garage handle, like we were drenched from the storm, and I was leaning against the metal handle. It was going across the L5 of my spine. And there was a boy shoulder to shoulder next to me. We were huddling, and then everyone else was sort of not connected to us. The side of the house got hit, came out through the garage handle, came out through L5. The boy who was shoulder to shoulder to me, it also probably came out through him as well. But all I know is that we both went flying, literally through the air, many, many feet, landing face first in the dirt. Excruciating pain as though someone hit me, but I really was not aware of what happened. And we just looked up, and all of our friends were gasping around us, and they're all screaming, "You got hit. You got hit by
Rightfully
lightning."
so.
You flew.
Wow.
I didn't believe them because I was conscious and alive, but I also couldn't explain the incredible pain in my spine and my body. My watch had stopped, and I was definitely in shock for sure.
Wow.
But my shock version is freeze, and freeze looks very neutral, flat affect, talking, seemingly functional, but completely dissociated at this point. And then I think I had my first seizure probably within a few days of that. And that was the first of many that would last from age 15 to age 38. But the irony, comedy of it all, I don't know. It was the 80s. And this is not a myth. This is real. In the 80s, if you're not bleeding, you're fine, right?
Yeah.
In the 80s, it was like, go outside and play. And if you come home bloody, then I'll be concerned. Otherwise, nothing really happened. And this was really the sentiment, which was parents didn't believe what happened. They called my parents and said, this is what the kids are saying, but Lisa's seemingly fine. My parents it just literally was like, that probably didn't happen. They did take me to a doctor. A couple months later, they had not witnessed a seizure themselves.
Okay.
Right? So these seizures were happening usually right after school. Both my parents worked. I was a latchkey kid. So
Yeah.
I'm home alone after school, and that's when they would happen. And I would crawl back to my room, hoping they wouldn't find me on the floor. And then I would lie and say I didn't
Yeah.
feel good. So they didn't see him. They did take me to a doctor here, like once, I think, right before I was 16. And the doctor said these were because I was hormonal, because I was
Hmm.
prepubescent. That was the diagnosis. So it was just a mess. And I was great at denial. And I just pretended that I was fine. And I was going to do what I was going to do. And lo and behold, a year later, I wanted to go to Germany, and I was going to go to Germany.
So at this point, you're Superwoman. You've been hit by lightning. So Germany's like, falling off the turnip truck.
Like
That's easy.
no big
Come
deal.
on.
Yes.
Wow. Wow. What kind of questions were with you between that lightning strike and neurosculpting? I mean, how did this path kind of work out for you
Yeah.
in relation to questions being a part of that?
It was really because I was able to ask questions that I found my gift. When you go into a very passive acceptance of things, it's very easy to be victim. And what a victim does is assume and expect that everything will victimize them. Victims don't ask questions. Victims just leap to assumptions. And so I was riding a line of, do I stay victim and just allow this to be a dissociative thing I live with? Or do I start inquiring? What is going on with me? And I did inquire quite a bit. My inquiry led me to lots of different metaphysical and meditational approaches. My inquiry started with, something's wrong with me. What could that be? How could I get more in touch with well-being? At the time, it was through that energetic, metaphysical, meditational lens. Long story short, that was amazing, great information, but it actually didn't heal my body. So the inquiry had to go further. As the seizures got worse, decade after decade, my inquiry had to go beyond metaphysics and towards brain function, nervous system function, mechanics. I knew nothing about the mechanics of my body. And so I had to inquire because doctors weren't giving me anything. I was considered non-epileptic because my cortical brain scans looked normal. So I wasn't on epilepsy medication. I think today they would have put me on epilepsy meds because it's much more prevalent now. But at that time, epilepsy was a narrower diagnosis. So I was on no meds. I had no prognosis, no protocols, and no actual diagnosis till my early 30s. So it was just like, I was the only one asking questions. My parents weren't even asking questions.
Really?
Even the friends who witnessed it were not asking questions. And I found that to be bizarre.
Yeah. Wow. Did the boy that was standing next to you, do you know if he had any long-term things? Was he out asking questions?
When I wrote my first book, New Beliefs, New Brain, it was published in 2012. I was writing the chapter on the lightning strike. And I reached out to my old best friend who was there because I know memory's faulty. I know we make up stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And I thought, maybe I made this up. Honestly, maybe I made this up. And I reached out to her and I said, can you please narrate to me your memory of that day? And she narrated it exactly as I had remembered it. And I said, so am I really sane? Was I really hit? She said, yes, you were. And so then I found him. I reached out to him. I found him through social media, reached out to him, hadn't talked to him in decades, probably since the incident. And I said, did you suffer anything from it? And he said, I don't think so. But he recalls. But what I really think happened was it came out through me and from me into him. So, he wasn't touching the metal. He was touching me.
Yeah.
I was touching the metal. So
that was very kind of you to absorb all of
Very
that
kind
effect
of
on
me.
you
yes,
and serve him. That was very generous.
it was generous,
God.
very generous. And, the decades of seizures were just unbelievable that I could be so delusional as to normalize them. I mean, this is what we do.
Mm.
Okay, so this is the other side. When we stop questioning and we just accept things, we normalize them. And sometimes that's wonderful. And sometimes that's really unhealthy. And I normalized my seizures because everyone else seemed to not care at all. So why should I? So I normalized them a bit and honestly, truly thought everybody had these experiences. And what I came to learn later through neurofeedback on multiple occasions, having my brain mapped, is that I have concussion patterns all over my brain because during every single seizure, I went down on my head. And so I don't even know how many concussions I've had. I never addressed those. I never addressed the fact that seizures were not everyone's everyday experience. I mean, when you're in it, you don't know anything different.
Yeah.
And so that aspect I wasn't questioning. And that led to a compound effect. But when I started using questions and inquiry to find out more, I did find solutions. Not only solutions, but the questioning opened up my destiny and allowed me to become a purposeful human being, completely in her purpose. And that was because I did question the what, the why, and the how of all of it.
Let's camp out on that a second regarding, because we'll get back to the journey in neurosculpting specifically, but let's dial in on your point about as you dove into really questioning that opened up this purpose and destiny. And it seems to me as you say that, it's almost what that purpose and destiny is, we'll talk about, and that's almost secondary to the fact that this did happen, right? Through inquiry, through questions, it opened up this world and you figured out a bit more of who you are and then how you chose to use this for good. So what was that process for you in really diving into the questions that got you to the pathway of, as you say, your destiny, your purpose, the like, what did that look like?
Well, first, it looked like the first big question was, what if this isn't normal to have these kinds of seizures where I'm needing to be resuscitated? Well, what if that's not normal? That was the first like actual visceral sense of I'm having a real important experience and it's not normal. It's not normal and I need to understand it. So what if this isn't normal? Question number one, which led me to, okay, well, where can I find out more? And so that led me to create an education path for myself. Now, I never studied any neuroscience to become a neuroscientist. I studied neuroscience because my doctors said they had no cure for me and that I would eventually die in seizure because it was getting close to that point. The last two seizures I had, I needed resuscitation. And I was fortunate that I had them in public. So the question I got to ask was because everyone else said they were out of answers. So when everyone's out of answers, then the questions become the game changer. So the second question was, so the first question, what if this isn't normal? The second question is, what can I learn in order to intervene here? And so that led me down the path of neuroscience. And I was devouring courses so I could learn about my vagus nerve, my central nervous system, my brain, my stress patterns, and neuroplasticity. And then the next question was, what resources do I already have that could support a practice that could move me in the direction neuroplasticity says I can go? And neuroplasticity told me I could rewire everything, theoretically. And that was enough. That was enough for me. So the question of what resources can I use to orient me towards that theoretical idea and put it into practice? And that was my meditation training. I was a meditator my entire life. I started meditating at 12. I was trained by Ashaya monks. I was trained in metaphysics. I mean, I have a lot of meditation and metaphysical training that were my resources, but they couldn't be used the way I was taught. They had to be used in concert with what I was learning about my nervous system. So then I had to ask the next question: how can I adapt them and fill in the gaps they're missing so that I'm using sound neuroscience principles to position my nervous system in a way that I can rewire it towards healing? So that was a big question. I had no protocols for that. I had no role models. Nobody was doing what I was doing at the time. So the question had seemingly no answers. So that was percolating. And then what happened was, when you mix curiosity with the urgency of imminent death, you get power you never knew you had. And so
it is a motivator.
It's a motivator.
That is for sure.
So how that played out was, last seizure was the one that I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't breathe on my own. I was ready to go. I was out of body completely. I was watching myself die, and I didn't care. And when I came back from that, because I had remembered I had a daughter sleeping in the crib, I better go back. I came back from that with the full knowing that the next seizure I had would kill me. So I'm not going to have another one. So my back was against the wall.
Wow.
I was desperate. And you mix that with curiosity, and suddenly there's solutions everywhere. And so I started playing with a meditational protocol. I was making changes and tweaks to meditation because it was not getting the job done. And neuroplasticity needed to come into the picture, and I needed a vehicle to re-entrain my nervous system. And I did. I created this 5-step process. I didn't know if it was going to work. But again, curiosity doesn't care if you have a certain outcome in mind. Curiosity is about not knowing the outcome, but being brave enough to try. And bravery comes from having nothing to lose. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain because I was dying. And that recipe is just pure potential. And so I created this protocol, practiced it every day, having no idea if it was going to work, practicing rewiring my stress response, rewiring my response to a seizure onset, a seizure halo, a seizure aura, right? You've got like a fraction of a second. And I was practicing, what could my body do differently? Again, questions, curiosity. Well, I could practice the opposite of seize. The opposite of seize is punch, kick, fight, scream, run, yell. That's the opposite of seizing and falling over. Yeah. So that's what I was practicing in my protocol. And then I practiced that for about 7 months and stayed curious, and then got another seizure halo 7 months into that process while driving a car. I couldn't drive. I don't even remember driving. My husband had to grab the wheel. He said I was driving. I thought I was the passenger.
Wow.
And the seizure was about to hit, and my practice script that I had been practicing for 7 months showed up on autopilot. I thought I was going to die, and here this script kicks in, and I start punching, kicking, screaming, and fighting. Now it was ugly, but it kept my brain oxygenated enough to not seize. And what ended up happening is that I broke through my seizure pattern. I interrupted a seizure.
Okay. Yeah.
That was the last time I ever was there. I've never had another seizure since that moment. And I knew I had repatterned it. I knew that it was because I was curious enough to try that which had never been done. I was curious enough to ask if there were solutions beyond what the doctors were telling me. I was curious enough to take action on my curiosity. I think that's a big thing. I was not afraid to take action on my curiosity because, again, I had nothing to lose. If you have nothing to lose, then making mistakes are irrelevant. They're meaningless. They're just vehicles for learning.
Yeah, there's
and I was,
steps on the road. Yeah, absolutely.
And I was there, and it worked. And I never had another seizure again. And I knew instantly, that was 18 years ago, I knew instantly my purpose on the planet. I was supposed to help other people move into well-being by taking agency over their own nervous system, having no idea how powerful it is. And so that was the sequencing of questions that led me to, this is my purpose. But again, I didn't know what that was going to look like. And I stayed curious, and I'm still curious. 18 years later, I'm still asking, what does this want to do in the world now? What does neurosculpting need in order for it to get to more people? You know, I ask those questions all the time still.
Just shudder to think the timing of the research on neuroplasticity becoming relevant or a thing at the right time, something for you to connect. Because if it was 20 years ago, there really would no hope.
So what's interesting, the timing is really critical because it was in like 97 that Mersnick discovered the capacity of neural networks to adapt and fuse. Like he was doing research with monkeys and motor neurons and motor networks in the motor cortex. And that's where like it popped, like these are malleable. That was 97. I was having my seizures since the early 80s, and it was 2006 or something that I broke through. So really neuroplasticity was just becoming available. It was still far from being a household word that it is now. And I really did have to dig hard to find courses and classes. And I had to piece together my education. But I probably couldn't have done that before 1997, to be honest.
Yeah. Wow. Curious about how it worked for you piecing things together to come up with your 5-step process that you've got now. How did that come about that you're like writing it out on a whiteboard or some variation? This is how I'm going to do this, such that you get your rough draft that you start working with, and then you iterate it on it a little bit, I'm assuming, right? There's a whole bunch of assumptions that I'm saying here.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah.
Well, I had to backwards engineer meditation. So first and foremost, I had to look at what neuroplasticity was telling me, what was how the brain worked, and I had to look at what meditation said it was doing. And neuroplasticity says one of the first things that you need to do is really start down-regulating your midbrain hypervigilant stress response. That's like step one for neuroplasticity.
Okay.
And when I looked at my meditation practice, my ascension meditation practice, my transcendental meditation practice, my Zen meditation practice, almost all of them stopped at step one of neuroplasticity. Let's quiet the stress response. That was the goal of meditation. But neuroplasticity said, well, that's step one of getting the brain self-directed. And I was like, oh my God, my meditation practice is the tip of the iceberg. What is missing from it? Well, neuroplasticity also said I must recruit focused attention in the front of the brain in order to start self-directing and harmonizing my learning neurotransmitters in a way that makes my nervous system poised to change, learn, and adapt. Well, meditation does not do that. That's not its purpose.
Right.
So I was like, okay, step 2 is completely missing from my meditation practice. So how do I recruit prefrontal cortex activation? I have to get my prefrontal cortex activated with things we know from neuroscience activates it. I have to juice it up, so to speak, with humor, novelty, awe, wonder. We don't do that in meditation, at least not in the forms I was trained in. So in my step 2, I had to use mental prompts to spark recruited focused attention, which does not mean float away and dissociate like my meditation practice means.
Mm-hmm.
It meant lock in, but without getting too hyper-focused. It's a Goldilocks spot. And it's done by mental focus on humor, novelty, awe, wonder, curiosity. So I go through a sequence in my brain of imagining a series of more and more outlandish, bizarre things, and then I end it with telling myself a joke.
Mm.
And bam, I'm in the prefrontal cortex. Well, that was never part of my meditation practice. And then neuroplasticity was teaching me that bilateral engagement of the brain makes things more valuable while learning them, meaning your brain perceives a higher value of something that is recruiting bilateral stimulation. Well, I want my brain to perceive my rehearsal is extremely valuable so that I entrain to it faster, quicker. And so I had to put a step in there that would very specifically create bilateral stimulation in the brain. EMDR does it. I think brain mapping might do it. I don't know, but it's a very proven neuroplastic effect. Mm-hmm. So I had to do it mentally. So I figured out a way to recruit left brain engagement and right brain engagement. And that was step 3. I was going to rehearse a new set of instructions while bilaterally stimulating so I could amplify the value of that rehearsal moment so that my nervous system was fully buying this story. And meditation also did not have that. And then I had to really anchor it into a somatic, visceral, felt sense because neuroplasticity also taught me that when you get the sensory and motor cortex involved through movement, you increase the value of the experience to your neurology. Your neural networks perceive higher value when you are now aligning your mechanical body with this perception. So when you want to really amplify learning, you add in physical motion. And so I had to add in a physical component to the meditation, which again, also not part of meditation. I had to either shake the body or make hand gestures or tap. And then I knew that my left brain wants to claim dominion over all experiences as true or false, as the arbiter of value. And so I had to end the meditation with step 5, which was allowing the left brain language center to name the experience so that it had a reference point. And so I created those 5 steps by looking at what meditation was missing. And this is not a ding for meditation.
Right. Yep.
It's been my lifeline, but it is missing the boat big time when it comes to neuroplasticity and nervous system regulation. It is fantastic for witness mode and relaxation. But when you have a nervous system that is freeze dominant, then that nervous system is already in witness mode most of the time. We call it dissociation. And meditation is downright dangerous for dissociative nervous systems. And I know this from my own experience because the more I meditated to relax, the further into the dissociative spectrum I became. Because dissociation is past the direction of relaxation in the nervous system, all the way into decelerated heart rate, no respiration.
Wow.
So I had to really ask what was missing, backwards engineer it, and realize that these things are tools, and timing and application matter to the efficacy of the tool. And there's nothing wrong with a tool. There's just something wrong with it when you use it for the wrong job.
What do we think is the percentage of the population that fall into that category that traditional meditation may be less helpful because they fit into this category? Any ideas on that?
Huge.
Oh, really?
And here's why I say that. And I don't have statistics, but I know what the nervous system does. In any and all moments, it has fair game to choose the shutdown direction to stress, which is freeze, or the arousal direction to stress, which is fight, flee. They're equally viable in our nervous systems. They should be used sparingly for just the right job, and then they should not be our fixed state of existence. Let's just look real quickly at the freeze spectrum. If you've ever been in a scary movie and you went, you froze. That's freeze at a very small scale. If you've been embarrassed and your cheeks turn red, you froze.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay. So that's a freeze response. If you're in the woods and you hear a scary sound and you go like that and you get very still and you turn your head and orient your ears, that's freeze in a very healthy, applicable manner. So we're all using freeze at all times. We're also using stress. Like if you duck out of the way of a flying object, that's arousal response to stress, right? So they're just there for us. And most people have both and use them in different contexts because we're human.
Yep.
But many people who do not realize what freeze is, and if they happen to use it just automatically more frequently than the arousal response, then they get really good at using it more and more, which can make becoming frozen easier and easier. And those people have a hard time identifying it because what freeze looks like to the outside world is nothing. It looks like a very calm demeanor in stress. It looks like a very flat affect on the face. It looks like grounded. It looks like the person you go to during the worst stress because everyone's screaming and crying and this person is just there. So it can mask and look like grounded, calm. It's not loud. It's not disruptive to others. Therefore, it's invisible to most people. If you have a classroom full of kids and 3 of them are screaming in terror at the spider and one of them is sitting calmly just staring at it, who are you going to rush to help?
The noisy kids that are
the noisy
clamoring.
kids, right? So arousal stress gets the spotlight. People don't often know that they're engaging in the freeze response. It's not validated externally. It doesn't feel like anything because it's actually numbing. So you're not alerted to it, which makes it very sneaky, very insidious. And it also happens to look just like someone does when they've meditated for a long time. Very calm, very neutral, deep, long breathing. It can look just the same. I feel like more people than even suspect are using the freeze response as their dominant response.
You very much identify as one that's predisposed to this. How much can this be learned or amplified based on environment, the house she grew up. Is that just another source or a conditioning that happens as well beyond being predispositioned?
Yeah, I would say that it is what makes you predispositioned. It's the tipping of the scales, right? Your nervous system is born to learn the best approaches for the right circumstances. And you will learn that through genetics, predominantly through environment, and through learning. We come in not entirely blank slate, but we come in with a nervous system ready to grab all the information and make sense of it. But with freeze, you can have a very skewed predisposition to it in certain instances. If you had a traumatic birth, if you were traumatized pre-verbally, then you can have a predisposition to freeze. Here's why. Because when you're born, your nervous system is intact, but its default is freeze because it's easily available. Whereas fight, flee requires you know how to move your arms and legs. And you don't get that information or skill for quite a bit.
Right.
So if you've got trauma in the birth to the point where you can have volitional control of arms and legs, then the most available stress coping response is freeze. So if it's the first thing your body uses in the world around you to deal with the dangers of the environment, then you have doubled down on your predisposition for that to be your go-to response as you get older. And I did have all of those things. I had a very traumatic, not because of my family. This is the bizarre thing. I grew up in a very normal house with a nuclear family and parents who loved me and not in a war zone and lower middle class. Like everything I could ever want was there. But I had a series of unfortunate events, I should say, and lightning was only one of them. I mean, I had profound trauma, preverbal trauma in the crib. I had terrible kidney issues by the time I was 9. I had almost lost my right eye at age 11 and had to get surgery to stitch my cornea back together. It was like one thing after another. I mean, and then I almost lost both my eyes when I was 19. It's laughable to me.
Wow.
It's laughable. Yeah, it's comical, I think.
Wow. I'm not rushing the day, but whenever it is that you transition and death happens, it's actually probably going to be a miracle if you're like all together. I mean, yes, you still have your eyes functioning. They're still with you. All your body parts are still with you, which I certainly hope is the case. And like I say, I'm not rushing it, but just from all the things that you've encountered already, it's like,
well,
wow.
I truly feel, I don't want to say it's past believe, it's past feel. I have the lived experience of 9 lives. I have it. I have flatlined on so many occasions. I've had so many concussions. I've had all sorts of things. Now, people have it way worse than me, and people have it way easier. It's not a comparison. But I have the lived experience that there is so much more than this. And we have so much power and potential if we're curious enough, right? If we ask the questions.
Right.
And nothing is as finite as we think it is. It's just not. If it was, I wouldn't be here talking to you.
Oh. How do you help folks adopt these new modalities outside of the mainstream? Because some of it may seem, oh, no, it's a meditation thing. Well, not really. You've got so many things grounded in science. How do you use questions in helping folks work through that?
Yeah, that's a great question. That I wrestled with that when I first decided I needed to put this out to the world. Meditation had its own connotations. And the audiences I knew I needed to address were not amenable to the word meditation. So how do I get this to the people who need it? And what came was the framework that I use physiology as the vehicle. I talk about what a mammalian nervous system does, and that's non-negotiable. It
Right.
doesn't matter how tall you are, thin, heavy, what color, how rich, how poor. A mammalian nervous system is governed by a set of instructions at its most base operating level that once you know that, you got the keys to the kingdom. So I always take that approach, which is to help people first understand everything you're feeling, experiencing, thinking, hoping for, praying for, and sad about is all coming from a nervous system. Would you like to get into that nervous system and find a little bit more resilience? The answer is almost always yes.
Right.
So that's the approach, is that this is not about meditation. This is not about belief systems. This is not about religion. This is not about science versus or metaphysics versus. This is about, are you a human? Do you have a nervous system? Then you should know how to use it. If you have a mouth, you probably know how to eat and chew. So you have a nervous system, you should probably know how to use it, because it is affecting, dictating, interpreting, integrating every single aspect of your entire human existence. It's the base operating system.
I love that recognition. And anytime we can tap into that operating system and play around, I'm like, that's where there's magic, because then the behavior and all these other things, just as a matter of course, will automatically respond, or they'll get adjusted accordingly.
Absolutely.
Once you're able to get back to that operating system and work at that level.
Everything is a function of an input or an output of your nervous system. Everything. And you can call your nervous system various things. You can call it just brain. You can call it spine and brain. You can call it peripheral nerves and organs. I don't care how you define it, but you can't deny it. It's the input and output mechanism of your three-dimensional body that your spirit lives in.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably should know how to drive it.
It's just amazing that here we are in this day and age, and this is a neglected practice of teaching.
Mind-blowing to me. We have been able to outsource the nervous system by way of creating external brains, behavior models, learning models, AI. But we don't know how to manage our own inside by way of even just the basics of stress management. This is mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing.
If we jump in the Wayback Machine, and if we're 200 years ago, then I guess just folks were operating on, this is just how I am, or something that needs to be fixed through religious practices, or this is why this happens because of behaviors, and just oblivious to this is how it's operating.
I'm going to make really blanket statements, which I don't really like to do, but I'm going to just do it. I feel like the inputs were less. The inputs to the nervous system were fewer.
Mm.
We had lifestyles that took the brunt of fewer inputs before advanced technology started bombarding us with inputs. So just even thinking about this just as a child growing up without a phone, there was no phone and no internet when I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of spaciousness that my nervous system had to intuitively, naturally do its job and recalibrate was built into my lifestyle. It was built into all of our lifestyles. right? So while
Yeah.
we may not have known the information, we didn't need to maybe know as much, because built into life were resilience practices, such as being bored, such as not having access to 24/7 global news, such as not being hyper connected to more humans than we can deal with empathically, to being localized in a smaller community, to having to play outside.
Right.
Just circadian rhythms alone from having to play outside unmonitored. These things are resilience building practices. Now, it doesn't mean we were better people then than we are now, but it means that we didn't have the insult of inputs to the degree we do now.
Hmm.
And the insult of inputs as they escalate requires more of our own self-directed practices to balance those out. And I feel like that's why the information is coming now, because it is needed. Whereas before,
Gotcha.
you grew up on a farm, of course you had stress, of course you had massive physical labor, but you also had circadian rhythms and nature and no phone and no internet, and there was a balance. You go out into the woods for a week, you're going to do for your nervous system what a year's worth of meditation will do living connected to your phone.
Yeah.
It's not
get it.
apples to apples, right?
Yeah, that's fair. I know you've done work with the police force. What is an area that the folks that are doing that kind of work, how does this most effectively serve them? Where does that really resonate with them?
Yeah. It's interesting because people are very polarized around the word cop or the idea of police.
Yeah.
And so I've had people praise me for the work I've done with officers, and I've had people hate me, calling me a traitor for the work I've done with officers, which I think is very ill-informed, because basically my mindset was, if you have your finger on the trigger of a loaded gun that could kill someone, you better have access to nervous system regulation. I don't understand why all humans wouldn't be in favor of that, right?
Absolutely.
So that was my first thought was that. And then I had multiple friends and family who were involved on site at 9/11. I grew up on Long Island, so everyone I knew was in it, and including my cousin. And he was already damaged going into it, as just life damages a cop, and or a damaged person becomes a cop, however you want to spin it to whoever's listening. But that event damaged him more. And then I saw that damage trickle down to his children. And so my very personal reason was, if I could get to the cops who have children, then we wouldn't have to see these children suffer the perils of their parents' demise as cops who go off the rails, because that's real.
Yeah.
And so I had a personal mission. And I first went and taught local police here in Colorado back in early 2007. And what I realized was that the industry itself desperately needed to understand what a nervous system does under stress, because it could prevent unnecessary violence. It could prevent police brutality. It could prevent killing. It could save lives. And that was my goal. And that meant going to the front lines where people's nervous systems would shoot a gun before asking the question.
Yeah.
And that's really why I went to those groups of people. And what I found was that they didn't want to be like that either. But they didn't have any tools, none, to make their own nervous systems restore, repair, and be resilient. And they needed that more than anybody, because they had weapons. And so it was an untapped need. It's still an untapped need. There's a lot of stigma about any kind of emotional regulation in police work, in first responder work, in military work. I've worked with the military as well. It's stigmatized. And that actually is part of the reason why I take the physiological approach, because I do not talk psychology. I do not talk meditation. That will not fly with those audiences. I am talking about a mammalian nervous system, tactical, and that's what they understand. And then when they do that, they eat this up and it has changed lives. And I am quite sure, without being able to give you statistics, that I have saved lives by sharing this with cops who otherwise might have shot first, asked questions later, or killed themselves, because that's a very real thing.
Yeah, that really is.
When you don't have tools of regulation and you see what you've become or what you're a part of, and you don't know how to get out of it, there's a way to get out of it, and cops take it. They load their guns and they kill themselves.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Yeah.
And bringing this to bear. Not too long ago, you had posted on Instagram a question, or on one of your videos, and it was about questions. And you said, just because it was true then, is it true now? This leads into the question of, how might questions be used for healing or interrupting the stories that we tell ourselves?
Yeah. Every experience we've ever had leaves a little archive of itself in the nervous system. And if it was very helpful and handy to save your life in the moment, or to keep you from shame or public stoning, then it's more retrievable in the archive. And so often what happens when we're in a present time situation, if that present time moment bears any resemblance whatsoever, 1% resemblance to 100% resemblance to something similar that happened in the past for which we developed a coping mechanism, we are going to automatically pull that coping mechanism to prevent further harm, because it worked then, so it should work now. And so by way of archiving and accessing those archives over and over again, we stop asking present time if this is in fact the same thing as then. We literally stop being present and start governing and framing and perceiving the current moment through the lens of all of the past instructions that we've participated in and developed. And that is both life-saving and downright dangerous. So it's life-saving in a moment. If you're walking down a dark alley and you hear something and your nervous system references that one time where you were almost attacked, you're absolutely going to defend yourself. That's a life-saving past reference.
Yep.
But a detrimental reference is, what do you do to relationships when you're not present to what they are now and you keep referencing 10 years ago? There's no growth. There's no in the moment connection. What do you do to your neighbors when a new neighbor moves in and they look just like that kind of person, and you have no present time experience with that human? So we're constantly jumping out of the present moment and referencing past instructions so we can navigate efficiently without having to reevaluate everything. The brain is very exhausted when it has to reevaluate everything, so it doesn't want to. So we have to literally, intentionally pause to be present, to create real-time response without defaulting to the energy-efficient, automated, habituated patterns. And that takes work. That is what neurosculpting does. It helps people shift their relationship to the older stories, anchor into a relationship to present time, and then even craft new protocols, new habits, new behaviors that they can use going forward that free them up from repeating the past.
Beautiful. In relation to being present, question to ask folks, what is their right now question? And this is something beyond what's for lunch or dinner and if I'm going to get married. And this comes back to what questions are you wrestling with or that you're working through currently?
Mm. Very prominent on my mind right now is how can I show up more to be a catalyst for harmonious human community and growth and connectivity. I feel like it's the need of the world right now. I feel like it's important work. I feel like it's hard work, and I don't know exactly how I'm supposed to do it, but that's the question, is how can I do that? And I know that because I've asked the question, I know I will be guided in that direction. I know I'll make plenty of mistakes while being guided in that direction, but those mistakes are catalysts for the next step. So I'm never afraid of those. In fact, they're necessary for me to be a different person tomorrow than I am today. And I need to be a different person tomorrow if I'm going to show up differently based on what the world needs right now.
Can you say something about the courage to live in that gap or to pursue that gap?
Yeah, I feel extremely fortunate that I have flatlined so many times because I don't really care about death. It sucks, don't get me wrong. It's not fun. At least my experience of it is it's not fun going into it. It's very peaceful when you're there, and it's not fun coming back out of it. Like neither end cap of that experience is fun. So I'm not like being flippant about it. I'm being truthful. I'm only ever afraid of myself. I'm not afraid of anything else. I do not care what people think of me. That is a freedom unto itself. Never underestimate the freedom and the power that comes from so much exploration of self that you are perfectly fine if you do not get validation from everybody. So when I talk about courage, it has come from flatlining so many times. It has come from waking up on the floor at Whole Foods, having urinated and defecated all over myself, unable to breathe or even know my name. It's come from almost dying on my daughter and realizing the impact that would have. It's come from, this is not a rehearsal. None of this is a rehearsal. And we're acting like like we're on social media all the time that we curate our lives and we draft a post and we edit it and we put a filter on. None of this is a rehearsal. Time's up soon for the body. And if you're a biohacker, it's up a little bit later. And if you're not a biohacker, it's up sooner. It's not a rehearsal. And I got that lesson a long time ago. So courage is not difficult. It's not difficult at all. If you've lost everything so many times, you can rebuild anything. Now, for someone who hasn't had those experiences, courage takes a lot of digging inside. And that's what I help people with. I help people find their potential, their courage, their sense of relevance and meaning and purpose. And that's really what neurosculpting is positioned to do.
Amazing. Yeah, and I would submit that perhaps doing a neurosculpting practice is better than having to die 9 times.
Yes, absolutely.
Or live out that life path. Yes.
Yeah. I learned from all of my body's lessons, some of them much slower learning than others, but I've learned all of that so I could share it with people so that you don't have to do the same thing. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. I got keys for your nervous system right here. I got them.
Nice.
I'm going to give them to you. I'm going to hand over the keys, and then drive it however you want.
That sounds like a plan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd love to chat longer, but I know that we need to wrap things up. So as we head in that direction, do you have any other thoughts or encouragements about questions that we didn't touch on that came to mind as we were preparing for this conversation?
Yeah, I just like to leave people with the idea that, I think sometimes people are afraid to even ask questions because they're afraid they have to come up with the answers. And it's like, I'm afraid of not having an answer. So I would just offer the invitation that not all questions are supposed to be answered. The more you ask them, the easier it is to ask them. And the easier it is to ask them, the more easily you're going to ask the one that does give you an answer that changes the game for you. So the pressure's off. You don't have to answer the questions you ask. You just have to get comfortable asking. We got AI to give us the answers and the data. That's not our job anymore. Our job is to be comfortable asking the questions we've never asked before. And when you put that all out there and you sift it down, then what you get eventually are some answers to the bravest questions you never would have asked before. And those will change the rest of your life.
Well said. Love it. Where is the best place for folks to engage with you, find out what you're excited about?
Yes. Neurosculpting.com is where our courses live, our meditations, our community. You can find me on Instagram at Neurosculpting, and you can have fun neuroplasticity exercises to do. You can get meditations on Apple Podcasts on Neuropraxis. It's my podcast channel that has just a library of potent meditations. And those are the places. And you can reach out through the website and jump into our courses or private practice with me. I coach one-on-one. I teach classes. I have retreats. Any opportunity to connect and help you through this is what I'm made to do.
Beautiful. And I am only going to encourage folks to reach out and ingest the things that you are putting out into the world. So thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for sharing your journey through the lows, lots of lows, but also some remarkable highs, teaching, sharing all that you've learned about neurosculpting and all that you're putting out into the world. So just thank you for being you.
You're welcome. And thank you for asking the questions. And I know you'll ask all the questions you need to so that your go forward plan is just bigger and better than you ever dreamed possible.
Amen to that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ken here. Last week, I attended a conversation between Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar and Arthur C. Brooks during a celebration of the International Day of Happiness. During the closing moments, Arthur Brooks succinctly summarized Gurudev's main points. I was dumbstruck by the speed and quality of the summation. Thankfully, I can reflect on these conversations a bit, and I offer the following observations from this episode with Lisa, to which I hope you have your own favorite moments and quotes. Number 1, questions become game changers when everyone else is out of answers. Lisa's doctors said they had no cure for her seizures, but her questions led her to find her own solution. Questions can move someone from passive acceptance to active inquiry, and in Lisa's case, to life-saving healing. The combination of curiosity, in the form of questions, with urgency created a unique power. Lisa's statement took my breath away. When you mix curiosity with the imminent danger of death, you gain power you never knew you had. Question: how can you inspire the same sense of urgency to encounter this unique power for the challenges in your life? Number 2, questions can interrupt automated patterns and stories. Asking, just because it was true then, is it true now, helps bring awareness to when we're operating from outdated coping mechanisms. Questioning helps create real-time responses rather than defaulting to energy-efficient, habituated patterns from the past. Lisa demonstrated this process by rewriting the response patterns so when the seizure halo occurred, her new practice intervened and averted a seizure. Question: what areas require a pattern interrupt in your life? What are the right questions to ask to cause it? Number 3, asking questions can reveal resources we already have and lead us to the future.
Lisa asked, what resources do I already have that could support a practice? Which helped her connect her meditation training with neuroscience. Questions then helped identify gaps in existing practices by asking what was missing from meditation, which allowed her to enhance it with neuroplasticity principles. Finally, the crucial step is to take action on our curiosity. Questions alone are not enough. They must be followed by experimentation and implementation. Question: what untapped resources are available to you to solve existing problems? Number 4. Finally, I appreciate Lisa's expansive view of what questions offer in the days ahead when she said, quote, "Our job is to be comfortable asking the questions we've never asked before. With AI and data providing answers, humans need to focus on asking brave, novel questions that can transform lives." Question: the future requires that we bring our brave curiosity to bear. How can you strengthen your inquisitive muscles to meet the demands of tomorrow? Thank you for joining me. To those on the other side of the speakers, thank you for being here. I trust this conversation with Lisa has been worthwhile. Remember to be a source of light to yourself and those around you. Gratitude shout out to Beauty Pill for the show's music and producer Ben Ford for the technical help. This episode was recorded on Piscataway land. Please engage with this episode in some manner. Download, follow, save, like, share, or comment about something that resonated. This action ensures we are engaging the questioning community. Until next time, keep questioning.